Hello everyone. In this section we're going to cover the constructor objects for each of the object types that we have here. So we're going to go over the functions that actually create the objects that are needed to run this game. So the first one we're going to look at is the player. So go ahead and make sure your player.lua file is open. And in this player.lua file we have, first off, a basic variable, the max speed. This is the fastest the player can move in either direction. So we're creating this variable outside of the player object, and it's very easy to manipulate this way. So a quick change to this number changes how fast the player can move. So this is the constructor. This function creates a self object. So it's an object named self, which we're starting in this situation as an image. And so self is a local variable. It only exists within the context of this particular function. But what we're doing is we're returning self to where it's originally called. So you'll see here player in this load function, this variable named player is being called to the function new player, and we're returning self to player. So this player variable becomes the self object that's in here. It becomes a reference to that. And the self object is everything we need for the player to function. So this player has a set of basic variables. It has the velocity, it's setting to 0. It has the x and y that come with creating an image. And it has other basic information such as the image itself that it's using. And later on, it'll also have other items that we receive through its functions. Now, the functions itself for the player, we have an update location function. This runs every frame and it updates the location of the player object. The score difference function, it checks the difference between the scoring location and the player's location. The change velocity function, which is activated whenever the player's velocity changes. So if a button is held down that moves the player left or right, this is called. And then lastly, a reset function. The reset function sets it back to the center of the screen and sets its velocity to 0. And then of course we have the return self, which, as stated, returns it to the player variable. Next up, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the level. So gametrack.lua. So as with the player, we have a variable y distance. This is the distance between each circle on the y track. So the larger this is, the longer the spread between each change. And of course, the shorter it is, the closer they're bunched together. You'll notice this also makes a very obvious difference in the speed of the track as it's moving, because it changes the overall structure of how long the actual track is. Now for our constructor, we pass the length, which is the length in seconds of the level. So we are telling the game its length. When we create the level with new game track, we pass the length onto it. So the first thing it does is, just like the player, it is a local self within this function. And we're starting this one as a display new group. Because this is going to have multiple images inside of it, it's going to be a display group. The first two items we give it are its total objects, which is its length. So this is how many circles it's going to have, which is the length of the object. Then we create two tables, an object table and a line data table. The object table is the basic table for all the objects on the screen, so all of the circles. And then the line data is the actual data set of where the scoring variable is for any point on the line. And then we have some functions we're going to go through. So the add data function adds a set of the data to the line data. We'll go into this later in the specifics of how this works. The add lines function adds all of the lines to the actual level. So this determines the lines, it actually creates each line, and then it inserts them into the group, and then it adds the data. So it calls the add data function that's internal to the level. Next we have update location. Update location updates the current location of the level. Now the level is moving through a transition that we call later, but this update location function updates a lot of the level's logic. So where the scoring location is, what point it's at any point in time. The start function is called when the level actually starts, and this sets up all the basic parameters. It sets the length of the level, it sets the Y location of the start, it sets how long the level is moving, and then it runs the transition that actually moves the level from its current location to the end location. Lastly, we have the reset function, and this resets the level to its default settings, so it removes all the line data and removes all the images. And then of course we return it to level as a variable. Next we're going to take a look at background. Background's very simple right now. It's just a constructor, and it's a constructor that sets an image based on the text we've provided for the image, and then it sets its X and Y location to the center of the screen. Now we created an object for this, so we could potentially expand upon it if we wanted to. If we wanted the background to have kind of more functionality, it's possible with this constructor. And it's much cleaner to have a constructor here than to have all of the background code in our main file. So while this is a very short file and it doesn't have much right now, it could potentially if we decided to add to it. Now let's take a look at the foreground. So the foreground constructor is a little longer. It has the display group, so it starts as a group. And this foreground object is these two buttons, this image, and the score text. So it's multiple items here. We'll see here with this one, it sets its default Y location. It creates the foreground image, which is this background image. Inserts that image. Then it creates the parameters for the score text, so where the score text is and how it works. And it displays that text, and it inserts it into the self group as well. And it also has a function. It has the update of the UI. So this is run every frame, and it updates the actual text for this text object, so the score text continues to change as it goes. Next we have the left button and the right button. So these are these buttons here. So this code runs the left button, this creates the right button. And then we also have the left button and right button press functions that are called when these buttons are actually pressed. So that is included in the foreground because it's part of the foreground UI. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the title screen. So the title screen is pretty simple. It is a display group. It sets its starting X and Y location, creates the background image, which is this blue rectangle, and then it has a couple functions. The first one is the add UI. So this function is called to add the actual text and button. Because we have this transition down, because it drops from the top, we actually don't have the text and the button show up until it finishes that transition. So this function is called when that transition ends. We also have the function for removing the title screen. So when you click restart and it begins, it removes this object. And then we have the transition itself. So because at this point in time the title screen is activated the moment that you create the title screen, we have this transition immediately run. And then this transition starts it from the top and drops it down and makes it do the bounce, as you'll see right here. And then it has an on-complete to add UI, which adds this text and restart button. Lastly, the title screen has a restart button press function, which removes the title screen information and starts the new game. So that's the basics for the constructors and a brief run through of the functions in each constructor. In the next few sections, we're going to go more into detail on the logic behind each one of these and how they function. Thanks for tuning in.